Hey everybody, how's it going? I just got finished with my Persian civilization overview, and one very interesting thing about the Persians is that they are the only civilization with fully upgraded camels and paladins. This got me thinking, when should I use paladins and when should I use heavy camels? Conventional wisdom says that camels are better versus cavalry, but that paladins are better versus everything else. However, I wanted to know exactly why this is, and so in this video, I'm going to use both some math and some practical game knowledge to compare these two units and to explain their differences to you. So to start off, if you look at the statistics of these two units, it's pretty easy to tell why the Paladin is considered the better unit. It has 180 HP, 18 attack, 5 melee armor, and 7 pierce armor when it is fully upgraded. A Persian heavy camel, on the other hand, which is fully upgraded but has no bonuses, has only 140 HP, only 11 attack, and 3 melee armor with 4 pierce armor. However, there are some hidden things that we need to take a look at. The first thing to take a look at is that the Camels do 18 bonus damage versus cavalry, they deal plus 9 versus camels, and surprisingly they deal plus 9 versus ships. The next thing to keep in mind is that Paladins are considered cavalry units by the game, but Camels are in their own separate armor class of the Camel armor class. What this means is that the Camels will generally get less bonus damage from units that deal bonus damage to cavalry. However, there's still something else that you need to keep in mind. If you're playing on the Conqueror's version of this game, Camels actually are not in their own separate armor class, but in the same armor class with, of all things, ships. In other words, Camels are the ships of the desert.
That's got to be the best pirate I've ever seen. So it would seem.
This means that the bonus damage values against the Camels will actually be different for the Age of Conquerors versus the HD expansions. Now, I'm not going to go over each and every example of this, but I do want to go over two main examples. The first example is that after HD expansions patch 5.7, they get 26 bonus damage from halberdiers, but in Age of Conquerors they get only 17 bonus damage. If you compare a Spanish Paladin, which is fully upgraded, to a fully upgraded Camel after patch 5.7, and versus an Age of Conquerors Camel, what you see is that the Paladin gets dealt 37 damage per shot, taking 5 hits to take down. It's the same number of hits for a patch 5.7 Camel, but for an Age of Conquerors Camel it actually takes 6 hits to kill. What this means is that if all three of these units fight a halberdier 1 versus 1, the only unit that does not survive is the heavy camel from patch 5.7. In other words, patch 5.7 significantly nerfed camels versus halberdiers. Halberdiers were already a very strong counter, but in the HD expansions keep in mind that they are an even stronger counter. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that camels are worse in the HD expansions than in AOC, because, remember, camels are classified as ships. This is important because ships get a significantly large amount of bonus damage from towers and castles, especially after heated shot. What this means is while a keep without arrow slits takes 36 hits to kill a Spanish Paladin, or 16 hits to kill a 5.7 Camel, it only takes 5 hits to kill a Camel from Age of Conquerors. The version of the game you are playing is most definitely something that is very important to keep in mind when you're deciding if you want to use this unit or not. However, for the duration of this video, we are only going to be looking at the HD expansions Camels. So, to get started, let's look at the strongest camels to see how they compare versus a Spanish Paladin or versus a generic camel. After Zealotry, the Saracen camel gets 30 more HP, and in Age of Conquerors, this is probably the best camel unit you have. The Indians get their own separate Imperial Camel, which is an upgrade to the Heavy Camel. It has 10 less HP than the Saracen Camel, but it has 13 attack, and it has 1 more of each armor than the generic Camel. Malians also have special camels that have 3 more attack because of their unique technology. It's also worthwhile to compare these units to a fully upgraded Cavalier, which has 140 HP, 16 attack with 5 melee armor and 6 pierce armor. Now, to compare the performance of these units, I did not have them fight each other. The main reason for this is because that doesn't show how they would actually perform versus the units they would see in a real game. Yes, there are times where camels will fight camels, or camels will fight cavaliers, but we all know that the camels will win versus cavaliers and paladins because of the extra bonus damage they have. I looked at the performance of these units against halberdiers, champions, arbalests, and hand cannoneers because they're all somewhat common non-mounted units. I also tested them versus boyars and heavy cavalry archers, because I wanted to give the camel's anti-cavalry bonus damage a chance to show what it's useful for. I also looked at the Genoese crossbowmen, because this unit has bonus damage versus cavalry and camels. Using the HP and damage dealt after armor of the paladins, camels, and the units I were testing them against, what I was able to do was to see how many hits it takes one of these units to take out the other unit. Now, if you're thinking this is just a bunch of numbers that's kind of hard to understand, the answer is you are definitely right. So what I did is I converted all these numbers to percentages compared to the paladin. A percentage of less than 100% means that the Paladin performed better in either defending against an opponent or in dealing damage to that unit. A percentage above 100% means that the Paladin was worse. To start off, when looking at the survivability of all these units, you can see that the Persians and the Malians have the same survivability. This is because the Malian unique technology only adds to the Malian camel's attack. The next thing to note is that the Paladin always survives longer than any of the other units. The only exception to this is versus halberdiers, which take 5 hits to kill all the units, but 6 hits to kill a Saracen camel. However, halberdiers are still pretty awesome counters versus any of these units. The next thing to note is that the Cavalier often survives in a similar fashion compared to the camels, taking more hits to kill than the Malian and Persian ones in most situations, but less than the Saracen and Indian camels. The major exceptions to this are versus heavy cavalry archers and arbalests, because the Cavalier has extra pierce armor, which means it'll do better versus these 2 pierce-dealing units. Also, halbs kill these Cavaliers in 1 less hit, because the Cavaliers get extra bonus damage because they're classified as cavalry. If you take the average of these percentages for each civilization, what you get is that the Persian and Malian camels only survive 64% as well as the fully upgraded Paladin. The Saracens and Indians survive 80% and 78% as well, respectively, and the Cavalier comes right in the middle at 76%. Now, whenever you look at the performance of a unit, you also need to see how quickly it takes out its enemies, and so I looked at the damage effectiveness of a unit. Now, before I generate the percentages, I need to correct for the fire rate of these units. Camels actually attack slower than Paladins, but Cavaliers attack a little bit faster, and what that means is that the percentages for the Camels all went down a little bit, and the percentages for the Cavaliers all went up. You can see that the Persians and the Saracens actually have the same damage output. You can also see that the Paladin kills everything but the heavy cavalry archer and the boyar much faster than the camels and the cavaliers, especially the halberdiers, champions, and Genoese crossbowmen, which take half as many hits to kill. The Cavalier is also a little bit faster than all the camels, with, again, the exception of heavy cavalry archers and boyars, but it's not that much faster. One very interesting thing to note is that they kill the hand cannoneers faster than even the paladins. The reason for this is because they both take the same hits to kill a hand cannoneer, but the cavalier attacks faster than the paladin does. If you again average these percentages, what you get is that the Persian and Saracen camels are 80% as damage effective as the Paladins. The Indians are actually 95%, and the Malians are 99.8%, which is basically 100% as effective as the Paladin. However, keep in mind that this is only so high because of the addition of cavalry. Now, when you combine these tests with actual real game knowledge, you get some very important takeaways. What you get are that halberdiers are hard counters to all of these units. Try to stay away from taking engagements with halberdiers. You also get that Genoese crossbowmen are hard counters to both. But despite doing less bonus damage versus the camels, they are super ultra deadly hard counters to camels because the camels deal about half as much damage versus the Genoese crossbowmen. Also, the conventional knowledge that champions, arbalests, and hand cannoneers are better countered by paladins and to some extent cavaliers still holds true. The boyar, on the other hand, is far better countered by camels, even though the boyar has such high melee armor. And even though the heavy cavalry archer dies far quicker to the camels, paladins survive far more punishment, which means I would probably actually choose paladins to try to counter heavy cavalry archers. And so, now that we finally know all this data about the camels, paladins, and cavaliers, we can finally answer the question, which is better? So if you take the average of both the survivability and the damage effectiveness of the camels, what you get are that the Persian camels are only 72% as good as paladins, Saracen camels are 80% as good, Indians are 87%, the Malians are 82% as good, and the Cavaliers are 83% as good. Now, having said these initial percentages, it's helpful to keep in mind that camels cost 55 food and 60 gold, whereas the paladins are more expensive at 60 food and a whopping 75 gold. What this means is that these percentages are accurate in a 1 versus 1 or population efficient scenario, but they're not very helpful if you're looking at the cost of the units. If you equalize the gold spent, what you get is that you'll have 80% as many paladins as camels. Or in other words, that 100% value that we assigned to the paladin earlier gets reduced to 80%. This makes them better than the Persian camels, equal with the Saracen camels, but not as good as the Indian or Berber camels. If you equalize the food spent, you'll instead get 92% as many paladins, meaning they're better than all the camels. And finally, if you equalize the resources, you get 85% as many paladins, meaning only the Indian camels are better. Now, while we're talking about cost, you might be thinking, well, what about the Berbers? Don't they get cheaper camels? The answer is yes, but I'll look at that in a separate video when I look at the comparison between the Berber cheaper camel and the Berber cheaper cavalier. Now, if you're like me, you're probably thinking, what about a situation in which population efficiency isn't important, but neither is cost efficiency? What you'll do instead is you'll look at the creation speed of this units. Paladins get created in 23 seconds, but camels get created in only 17 seconds, which means you'll have only 74% as many paladins. Given equal training time, all the camels are more effective than the paladins, with the only exception being the Persian camel. Now, before I end the video, I want to step back a bit and acknowledge some very important things that we need to really keep in mind when comparing these two units. The first thing is that these tests are inherently flawed because they're based on a very small sample size. If I added more cavalry units to this test, the heavy camels would do far better, but if I took away all cavalry, the paladins would always be better. I tried to have a broad sample that covers many different types of units, but it's not perfect. Also, the most important thing to keep in mind is that everything will be situational. Only Persians and Byzantines will have to make the choice between camels and paladins in a late game scenario. And what this means is that most camel civilizations will have to choose between camels and cavaliers. The cavaliers did perform marginally better in some situations, but you have to keep in mind that it might just be better to stick with the camel based on your army composition. For example, as the Mongols, I'm probably not going to be making cavaliers to counter arbalests because I already have siege onagers to do that. But as the Turks, there's a good chance that I would. Also keep in mind that Indians and Saracens don't really have a choice because neither of these civilizations get cavalier, and in other words, their strongest cavalry unit will be their camels. Well, that's all for this one, guys. I hope that you found this video interesting and that maybe it's shown you why players really do like Paladins over heavy camels and why they are considered the stronger unit. I hope that you found this interesting, and I'll see you in the next one.